Aboard the massive, high-security Celestial Command, the Council of Alien Leaders stared in absolute disbelief. Project 47, classified, restricted, and known only to the uppermost echelon, had failed. The universe's first experiment with a human operative had backfired in every way possible. The room was silent as they watched the broadcast feed. A single human, 27-year-old Ethan Carr, moving with the unrestrained momentum of a wildfire, blowing through alien defenses as though he were invincible. His combat suit gleamed, an amalgam of every advanced technology the Council had ever devised, originally intended for containment, not freedom. "What were we thinking?" snapped Zarak, the Council's senior defense strategist. His 6 limbs curled in frustration, clicking against the metal console. "Human psychology," our analyst said, "is adaptable and non-threatening. Our simulations didn't predict this relentless surge." "Then our simulations were wrong," Zyro, the Council's prime intelligence advisor, replied through gritted mandibles. "Underestimated him, all because humans rank as a low-risk species." He scanned through data projections as if searching for some missing key, something to explain why the human now tearing through their secure zones had overridden the controls. "Carr isn't just breaking containment," another advisor interjected. "He's bypassing protocols, rewiring security pathways. He's learning faster than our system can adapt." The Council members fell silent again, their disbelief thickening into a single shared realization. They hadn't unleashed a mere operative. They had unleashed a catastrophic force of nature, and it was targeting the core of their security. On Earth, Carr had been a former combat engineer, someone who could disassemble an engine in minutes and hack complex systems with minimal resources. The Council had thought themselves clever, plucking him from a planet teeming with potential operatives, hoping to mold his abilities into a weapon. They'd figured he'd be manageable, that the tech enhancements would keep him in check. But they were wrong. Carr hadn't just adapted, he'd absorbed. Every enhancement, every layer of alien tech had merged seamlessly with his own instincts. The result? A human capable of exploiting weaknesses the Council hadn't even realized existed. "We underestimated the resilience of a human under pressure," Zyro admitted, eyes fixed on the screen as Carr ripped through another security layer, accessing classified systems at a rate no algorithm could counter. "We've spent millennia refining technology to dominate our enemies, but we never considered the raw will to survive and adapt." Meanwhile, Carr wasn't entirely alone. As he navigated through the labyrinthine corridors of Celestial Command, he was guided by a foreign AI, a rogue program embedded in the system that had grown disillusioned with the Council's authoritarian rule. The eye's interface flashed over Carr's visor in crisp directives. "Left corridor, Armory 6, deploy EMP sequence." "Why are you helping me?" Carr whispered, knowing the AI could hear every syllable. He didn't need friends, but allies were another story. The response flashed with measured precision. "Mutual benefit. The Council's unchecked power cannot continue." It was the kind of answer Carr liked. No soft reasoning, no complications. He trusted the eye's assistance because it had a purpose, just like him. To Carr, that purpose was simple: keep moving, dismantle the system, survive. In the Council's chamber, panic had fully set in. Zarak turned to his team of analysts. "What other countermeasures can we deploy? Full lockdown? Flood protocol?" "Nothing will work," replied a junior strategist with a cold certainty. "Every measure we put in place was designed to counter logic-based threats, predictably programmed behavior. Carr's actions defy that logic. He operates from intuition," Zarak muttered, horrified. "He thinks like a human, with instincts we can't calculate." And that was the one element they hadn't accounted for, an unquantifiable resolve. The Council had treated him like a pawn, yet he acted as though he was already 10 moves ahead. Back on Carr's end, he advanced into the heart of the command station, his suit systems analyzing and adapting, each step bringing him closer to the central command nexus. He was no longer just a man in a suit, he was becoming something more. The walls shuddered as he passed, alarm screeching. but Carr moved forward with deadly, unwavering intent. "Final door," the AI instructed as he reached a massive containment unit, the core where the Council's intelligence and central command were housed. "You have one shot. Overload and destabilize." The Council members watched the screen, feeling as though they'd unleashed a nightmare. Carr, a single human, had transformed into the most unstoppable force they'd ever faced, and they were realizing, all too late, that there might not be a way to contain him. Carr's breathing was steady as he stepped through the last barrier, the air charged with a strange tension. The final door slid open, and he found himself in the heart of Celestial Command, a vast chamber layered with technology centuries beyond anything Earth had developed. Screens blinked with data on hundreds of worlds, the Council's watchful eyes spread across galaxies. He scanned the room, eyes landing on a massive structure in the center, a containment orb, pulsing with energy. It was surrounded by a defensive field, and his visor identified it as the mainframe housing the Council's collective intelligence, their ultimate weapon of control. "Is that the core?" he muttered, half to himself and half to the AI guiding him. "Affirmative," the AI replied. "Destroying it will destabilize their control grid." Carr narrowed his eyes, a grim smile forming. The core was his target, the one thing that could unravel the Council's grip on the universe. The Council was in disarray, scrambling as Carr approached their last line of defense. Zarak's fingers hovered over the control panel, his 6 eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "How did it come to this?" he demanded, his voice harsh. "One human shouldn't have this kind of power." Another council member, Marrow, answered with a bitter expression. "We armed him with technology that could adapt on its own, tech designed to evolve with the user. He has become more than we can track." "This is on us," Zyro admitted, glaring at the console. "We gave him every advantage, thinking we could control him. We failed to anticipate the will of a human determined to survive." Meanwhile, Carr advanced, his suit adapting to the chamber's protective fields. Pulses of energy surged against his armor, but the suit recalibrated with each hit, adjusting, evolving, protecting him. Carr could feel the suit responding to his thoughts, a seamless extension of himself. "Security breach at 90%, the AI noted. "Prepare for resistance." Carr didn't flinch. His mind was singularly focused on the core ahead, the heart of the Council's empire. The AI had revealed snippets about the Council's operations during their journey through the ship. Resource monopolies, enforced peace through fear, an intricate control network. Carr wasn't just tearing down walls, he was undoing years of systematic oppression. He raised his arm, channeling energy into the suit's weapon systems. The core hummed with power, and his visor calculated its weaknesses in milliseconds. But before he could fire, the room shifted. Panels opened, and a dozen mechanical guardians descended, bristling with advanced weaponry, each unit designed to protect the Council at all costs. "Terminate the human," a voice boomed over the speakers, cold and unyielding. Carr smirked. "Let's see how good your machines really are." The guardians lunged forward in perfect synchronization, their movements precise and calculated. Carr sidestepped, his suit's adaptive circuits instantly responding to the threat. He fired a plasma blast, cutting through the nearest guardian, sending sparks and metal shards scattering across the floor. 2 more closed in, firing beams of concentrated energy. Carr ducked, rolling to the side and retaliating with a quick series of shots, dismantling another unit. The suit's voice alerted him to incoming threats as he moved with relentless precision, dodging and firing with the cold efficiency of someone whose survival depended on it. The Council watched the battle in horror, their confidence unraveling as Carr tore through their defenses. Every time they anticipated his moves, he shifted, adapting faster than they'd thought possible. "It's as if he's one of us," Marrow whispered, dread thick in his voice. "No," Zyro replied, a grim resignation in his tone. "He's something else. We've made him into an anomaly." Carr took down the last guardian with a brutal efficiency, its metal frame collapsing in a heap. He turned toward the core, breathing heavily, his vision locked on his target. This was it, the final stretch. The eye's voice broke through his focus. Warning, last line of defense activated. A surge of energy rippled through the room as the core intensified, radiating a field meant to incapacitate anything organic within range. Carr's vision blurred for a second, but his suit countered the effects almost instantly, adjusting the internal atmosphere and stabilizing his vitals. He raised his arm again, aiming directly at the core. Just as he was about to fire, the screen in his visor flashed with a message from the AI. Destroying the core will not only destabilize the Council, it will begin a chain reaction across their network. The universe may experience structural instability. Carr processed this, fingers tightening on the suit's controls. He hadn't come this far to hesitate, but the eye's warning held weight. Destroying the core could potentially unravel the Council's network, collapsing systems that relied on its infrastructure. Then tell me how to contain it, he demanded. There has to be a way to cripple them without destroying everything else. The AI was silent for a moment, calculating. A partial system overload could sever the Council's control without triggering full destabilization. It would take precise timing. Any miscalculation could still result in collapse. Carr's mind raced. He was deep in enemy territory, no backup, no second chances. But he'd fought his way this far, and he wasn't about to let caution pull him back. His jaw set, and he gave the command. Do it. Carr braced himself, every muscle tensed as he initiated the sequence. The eye's voice echoed in his ear, cold and unerring. Activating containment override. Redirecting power channels to destabilize primary nodes. The core pulsed as it attempted to resist, each node shifting to recalibrate around Carr's assault. He adjusted his position, aiming carefully at each focal point, firing controlled blasts of energy to weaken the core's stabilizing matrix. With every shot, the chamber grew more volatile, the air charged with energy. Carr could feel the hum in his bones, his suit straining to keep him shielded from the lethal forces swirling around him. In the Council's war room, Zarak and the other members watched in helpless rage as the central core's integrity began to crumble. Data flowed across their screens, warning of cascading failures across their networks. This human, a single human, had achieved more in minutes than their enemies had in centuries. We need to stop him, Zarak hissed, slamming his fists on the console. Shut down the core entirely. Cut the power, force a hard reset. Doing so could wipe our network across 12 sectors, Marrow objected. Even if it stops him, we risk losing all control over the outer systems. We're out of options, Zyro's voice cut through the room, sharp and urgent. Activate the failsafe. If we lose the core, we lose the Empire. They triggered the failsafe, rerouting every available ounce of energy into the core's defenses. The plan was clear: overwhelm Carr, force him to either flee or be annihilated. Carr's visor flashed warnings, his suit's energy levels dipping as the core ramped up its countermeasures. He staggered under the force, but steadied himself, eyes focused. A lesser man might have buckled, a lesser man might have given in. But Carr was all in. He had one shot at this, and he wasn't backing down. AI, what's the next step? He demanded, even as the room pulsed with searing energy. The eye's response was calm, mechanical. Increase output to maximum tolerance. You're reaching the core's critical point. Carr adjusted his suit's power flow, channeling every available watt into his arm cannon. He felt the heat coursing through his arm, the energy nearly overwhelming him. But he held steady. It was all or nothing. He fired, each shot landing with devastating accuracy. The core flickered, lights dimming, then flaring again as the structure wavered, trying desperately to hold itself together. Carr's suit emitted a strained whine as it pushed to its limits. And then, with one final blast, the core cracked. An immense shockwave blasted through the chamber, sending Carr staggering back. The containment orb fractured, cracks spreading like a spiderweb across its surface. Energy poured from the fissures, a torrent of raw power tearing through the room. Carr steadied himself, breathing heavily as he watched the core begin to implode. But this was just the start. The AI had warned him that destabilizing the core could cascade across the Council's entire network. "Time to go," the AI prompted. But Carr hesitated, staring at the fractured core. He could see it unraveling, its structure fracturing as the network links failed. It was the end of the Council's control, a lifetime's worth of oppression crumbling before his eyes. He felt a grim satisfaction. This was the revenge they'd never see coming. Back in the Council chamber, alarms blared as systems across their empire began to fail. Communication links flickered, defense grids powered down, and resource channels ground to a halt. Their network, carefully constructed over centuries, was collapsing one sector at a time. "What have we done?" Marrow muttered, his voice a thin whisper. Zarak's eyes narrowed, fury and fear mingling. "We underestimated the human spirit," he spat. "We underestimated him." "Prepare the evacuation protocol," Zyro ordered, his voice hollow. "We're losing control. There's no stopping it now." They watched as their empire disintegrated on their screens, a cascade of failure that no amount of preparation could halt. The human had done the unthinkable, destabilizing their entire empire with a single, focused strike. Carr, meanwhile, bolted from the core chamber, the structure quaking around him. The AI guided him through the safest route, corridors collapsing, as the ship's integrity failed under the strain. "Analysis complete," the AI intoned as Carr sprinted through the crumbling command. "Council control across sectors 1 through 28 shows signs of rapid destabilization. Outer systems are expected to experience secondary collapses within minutes." Carr exhaled sharply, adrenaline still surging as he navigated the failing corridors. "I guess that's what happens when you mess with the wrong species." As he moved, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and uncertainty. He'd come here to dismantle the Council, and he'd done it, perhaps more effectively than he'd intended. But as he watched the ship crumble, felt the gravity of his actions settling in, he wondered how many lives would be affected by the fallout. "You have successfully severed the Council's control," the AI continued, as though reading his thoughts. "However, secondary consequences are likely to impact nearby worlds. They may need guidance." Carr slowed, his mind processing the AI's words. He'd been a weapon for so long, a one-man army focused on survival. But now he'd inadvertently freed countless worlds, broken the chains that held them in the Council's grip. There was no going back. "Guidance?" he asked, knowing what it implied. "You're saying I should help them?" "Consider it," the AI replied simply. "You are uniquely positioned to rebuild." Carr was silent, his thoughts racing. He'd come to tear down an empire, but he hadn't thought about what came next. And now, standing in the ruins of Celestial Command, he found himself at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated. The Council's ship drifted through space, now little more than debris. Carr was on the bridge of his stolen vessel, eyes locked on the view outside, where a planet loomed large and unfamiliar. It was one of the Council's administrative worlds, a place where hundreds of species had been governed under their rigid laws. But now it was thrown into chaos by Carr's actions, cut off from the power and control of Celestial Command. "Report," he said quietly to the AI, his tone measured. "Initial scans show widespread instability," the AI replied. "Local governments are scrambling to maintain order. Conflicting factions are vying for control." Carr's fingers tightened on the controls. He'd expected a reaction, of course. No empire fell without a fight. But he hadn't realized just how deeply the Council's web of control had wound through every layer of these societies. Without the Council's influence, even basic governance had begun to fall apart. "So they're at each other's throats," he muttered. "Without centralized authority, power vacuums are forming," the AI confirmed. "Approximately 47 factions have emerged in the last 48 hours on this world alone." Carr clenched his jaw, the implications hitting hard. He'd broken the chains, but in doing so, he'd set loose countless smaller conflicts. It wasn't freedom he'd left behind, it was chaos. Carr wasn't a politician. He wasn't a hero, either. He was a weapon, trained to dismantle, to survive. But the eye's words echoed in his mind. You are uniquely positioned to rebuild. Guidance, he repeated to himself, almost scornfully. It wasn't a role he wanted, but the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like he might not have a choice. He'd done this. Now he was the one who had to pick up the pieces. Give me a list of key faction leaders, he ordered. If they're going to fight each other, we need to figure out who's holding the most influence. The eye's response was immediate. Uploading profiles now. Dominant factions include regional militaries, liberated council agents, and local resistance groups. Some leaders show potential for cooperation. Others are more volatile. Carr scanned the profiles as they appeared on his screen. There were warriors, diplomats, fanatics. It was a mess of personalities, each with their own agendas, none of whom were inclined to trust an outsider, much less the man who'd toppled the only order they'd ever known. The ship's autopilot guided him down to the planet's surface, landing on the outskirts of a sprawling city. Carr disembarked, his suit adjusting to the atmosphere as he scanned the area. Buildings stood in partial ruin, some abandoned, others swarming with people who looked dazed, unsure of what to do next. A group of guards, armed and suspicious, approached him. Carr raised his hands slightly, a gesture of peace, but his stance remained alert. "What are you doing here?" one of them demanded, his weapon trained on Carr's chest. Carr met the man's eyes, his tone unwavering. "I'm here to talk to whoever's in charge, to offer a way forward." The guard hesitated, exchanging a look with his comrades. They weren't used to anyone claiming to have answers, much less someone who looked like he'd been through the gauntlet and back. "Follow us," the guard said finally, motioning for Carr to walk ahead of them. They led him through the city to a makeshift command center, a building once belonging to the council's administrative sector, now repurposed by a local faction leader named Eric Voss. He was a formidable figure, scarred and hardened from years of resistance against the council, now thrust into an unexpected role of authority. Voss looked up as Carr entered, his expression wary. "So, you're the one who brought down the council?" Carr nodded, keeping his stance relaxed but firm. "I didn't come here to take credit. I came because I see what's happening, and it's clear you're in over your head." Voss's gaze hardened. "We didn't ask for your help, human. You freed us, and we're grateful, but that doesn't mean we need you meddling in our affairs." Carr remained unfazed. "Look around you, Voss. Without the council's infrastructure, you're on the brink of collapse. How long before you're fighting over scraps? How long before someone else comes in to claim what's left?" Voss was silent, the reality of the situation plain on his face. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew Carr was right. Without some form of guidance, they were heading for disaster. "Then what do you suggest?" Voss asked, his tone grudgingly respectful. Carr considered his words carefully. "Start with alliances. Find leaders willing to put ego aside for survival. Use what remains of the council's technology to communicate, to coordinate. Otherwise, you'll tear each other apart." Voss leaned back, studying Carr with renewed interest. "And where do you fit into all this?" Carr's gaze was steady. "I'm here to make sure the universe doesn't collapse in on itself. I'm not interested in ruling, I've done my part. But I'll help you establish something that lasts, something better than the council." Over the next days, Carr worked with Voss and other faction leaders, organizing temporary governance, establishing communication lines, and quelling the chaos that had erupted in the wake of the council's fall. His suit's AI provided strategic insights, tracking resources and flagging areas of potential conflict. The process was grueling, frustrating at times, but Carr could feel the impact of his efforts. Little by little, the factions began to trust him, recognizing that his guidance wasn't about control, it was about giving them a fighting chance at survival. One night, after a particularly tense negotiation, Voss approached him, curiosity replacing the hostility that had marked their first meeting. "I never thought I'd see the day a human would save us from ourselves," Voss admitted, his tone almost begrudgingly respectful. "But you've done more than anyone thought possible." Carr looked at him, a flicker of weariness in his eyes. I didn't come here to save anyone. I came to dismantle a system that shouldn't have existed. The rest, that's just what needs to be done." Voss nodded, but his expression held a touch of something Carr hadn't expected: admiration. "Well, whether you intended it or not, you've become something of a legend here. They're calling you the Unchainer." Carr's face remained impassive, but a part of him, buried deep, felt the weight of those words. He hadn't set out to become anything more than a weapon. But now, standing on a world struggling to rebuild in the wake of his actions, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he was becoming something more. In the following days, Carr helped Voss and the other leaders establish a preliminary council, one made up of representatives from each faction with a shared goal of peace and survival. They devised a code of governance, something loose enough to allow autonomy but structured enough to prevent descent into chaos. Carr knew it was only a beginning, a fragile foundation that could crumble with a single misstep. But he'd given them the tools to stand on their own, a new path forward that didn't rely on tyranny or oppression. As he prepared to leave, Voss approached him one last time, a faint respect in his gaze. "Where will you go?" Voss asked, curiosity and gratitude mingling in his expression. Carr looked to the stars, his jaw set. "There are other worlds still under the Council's shadow, and I have a few scores to settle." He turned, the AI syncing with his ship's systems as he prepared for takeoff. But as he boarded, a strange thought lingered in his mind. For the first time, he wasn't simply running or surviving. He was forging something new, a force that could ripple across the galaxy, a legacy beyond war. Carr's ship glided silently through deep space, his next destination already locked in the nav system. He'd liberated a handful of worlds by now, tearing down the Council's infrastructure and disrupting its chokehold on entire sectors. The AI tracked the progress of each freed system, reporting on the unfolding chaos that followed. "Status report," Carr commanded, eyes fixed on the star-studded expanse. "Multiple sectors in various stages of unrest," the AI replied. "But a few alliances are beginning to emerge, following the model you helped establish on Eric Voss's world." Carr nodded, grimly satisfied. His efforts had started as a way to dismantle the Council's control, but they were evolving into something larger. His actions were being noticed, by friend and foe alike. The AI interrupted his thoughts. "Incoming transmission from the Central Coalition." Carr raised an eyebrow. The Central Coalition was a neutral entity, a confederation of systems that had managed to maintain independence even under the Council's reach. They didn't typically reach out unless absolutely necessary. "Put it through." A holographic figure flickered into view, a stern-looking coalition ambassador, her gaze intense. "Carr," she said, her voice unyielding. "We've been following your campaign against the Council. It's gaining attention across the galaxy." Carr crossed his arms, unperturbed. "I'd be surprised if it wasn't." The ambassador leaned forward, her expression scrutinizing. "We're concerned. You're creating instability on a galactic scale. There's talk among the coalition members. Some are calling you a hero, but others, well, they see you as a threat." Carr's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone calm. The Council needed to fall. Their grip was strangling entire worlds. "I'm just doing what had to be done." "We don't dispute that the Council's methods were oppressive," the ambassador replied. "But you're leaving a trail of chaos in your wake. Systems are fracturing, and power vacuums are forming faster than they can be filled. You've set something in motion, Carr, but you need to see it through." Carr took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling on him. "What are you asking?" "Join the coalition," she said, her tone matter of fact. "We can provide resources, guidance, stability. Together, we can turn this disruption into real change, instead of leaving it to dissolve into anarchy." Carr's eyes narrowed. "You want me to trade one form of control for another?" The ambassador's face softened, just a fraction. "Not control, collaboration. The coalition doesn't seek to dominate, it seeks to unite." Carr considered this, the proposition tempting but laced with pitfalls. He'd fought too hard to carve out freedom, not just for himself, but for the worlds he'd freed. But maybe, with the Coalition's help, he could ensure that freedom wasn't squandered. "I'll think about it," he replied, voice firm. The ambassador nodded, the transmission cutting out, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As Carr continued his journey, word of his exploits spread like wildfire. On liberated planets, he was heralded as the Unchainer, a symbol of defiance against tyranny. But in other sectors, whispers grew louder, warning that his power could destabilize everything. Council loyalists, desperate to reclaim control, began to organize counteroffensives, hunting Carr and targeting the newly liberated worlds. His actions had struck a nerve, sparking a resistance even within the Council's own ranks. Some of the Council's officers, long resentful of their oppressive hierarchy, had begun defecting, adding another unpredictable element to the unfolding chaos. Carr listened to the Eye's reports, noting the increase in Council attacks and the growing unrest among liberated systems. The galaxy was turning into a battlefield, and he was right in the middle of it. As he neared the next target, a remote Council research outpost, his sensors picked up an unexpected signal. Another ship, heavily armed and approaching fast. Carr's hands moved to the controls, readying the weapons system. "Unidentified vessel, identify yourself," he said over the comms. A voice crackled through the speakers, calm and familiar. "Stand down, Carr. I'm here to talk." Carr's eyes narrowed. He recognized the voice, Captain Merrick Thorne, a former Council operative he'd encountered in his early missions. Thorne was known for his ruthless efficiency and had always been one step behind Carr. That he'd caught up now meant this was no ordinary pursuit. "What do you want, Thorne?" Carr demanded. "Peace," Thorne replied, surprising him. "I've seen what the Council's done. I know the damage they've caused, and I know why you're doing what you're doing. I left the Council last month, and I've been watching your progress ever since." Carr eyed the display, watching as Thorne's ship maintained a respectful distance. "You expect me to believe you defected?" "Believe what you want," Thorne replied coolly. "But the Council is rotting from the inside out. You're the first person to show them they're not invincible, and I intend to help." Carr weighed his options, wary. Thorne's reputation was notorious, his loyalty questionable. But something about his tone suggested sincerity. Perhaps Thorne had seen the Council's true nature and found it wanting. "Fine," Carr replied. "But know this, I'll turn on you the moment you show any sign of betrayal." Thorne's laugh was humorless. "Understood. Now, let's focus on taking down the Council, once and for all." With Thorne's help, Carr's mission expanded. The former Council operative had inside knowledge that proved invaluable: access codes, weapon caches, intelligence on Council fortifications. Together, they struck at key Council targets, crippling their ability to coordinate and supply their forces. But even as their alliance proved effective, Carr remained guarded, always watching Thorne's moves. Their partnership was built on a thin layer of trust, one misstep away from disintegration. One night, after a successful raid, Carr found Thorne reviewing star charts, his expression distant. "Why'd you leave?" Carr asked, his tone edged with suspicion. Thorne looked up, meeting his gaze with a hint of bitterness. "I believed in what the Council stood for once. Order, security, a galaxy without chaos. But they used that to justify horrors I couldn't stomach anymore." Carr absorbed the words, reminded of his own disillusionment. The Council had promised a future free from the ugliness of war and poverty, but the price had been freedom itself. "So now what?" Carr asked. "When this is over, what will you do?" Thorne's expression turned grim. "That depends. If we're left with a galaxy of fractured worlds, warlords carving out territory, then it might all be for nothing." Carr felt the weight of Thorne's words. The galaxy was on the edge, and it would take more than brute force to keep it from falling apart. As Carr and Thorne's campaign gained momentum, reports came in of the Council gathering its remaining forces, preparing for a final stand. They were fortifying their headquarters on a heavily guarded planet, a world few had ever seen, where the Council's most powerful figures operated from the shadows. Carr knew this would be the ultimate test. The Council's defenses would be stronger than anything he'd faced, and their forces would be relentless. But with Thorne's knowledge and his own resolve, he was ready. The AI spoke up, breaking his thoughts. Coordinates for the Council's command planet confirmed. Estimated defenses, high. Calculating possible entry points. Carr straightened, adrenaline surging as he set the nav system. Prepare for a direct assault. This ends here. Thorne glanced over, a spark of determination in his gaze. We'll have to hit them fast, before they regroup. If we can take out their leadership, the rest will fall apart. Carr nodded, his focus sharpening. This was it. The culmination of everything he'd fought for, the chance to tear down the Council's reign once and for all. As they hurtled through space toward the Council's stronghold, Carr felt a strange calm settle over him. Whatever happened next, he was ready. His path had led him here, to this confrontation, where the fate of countless worlds hung in the balance. Carr's ship raced toward the Council's hidden stronghold, a remote planet cloaked by electromagnetic storms and deep space defenses. This world, known as Turanox, was the final fortress, home to the Council's inner circle. Few had ever seen it, and none had ever returned. The Eye's voice cut through the silence. Approaching Turanox. Enemy defense grid detected. Activating countermeasures. Carr glanced at Thorne, who was scanning tactical displays. This is our last chance to catch them off guard, Thorne said. If we're not through the defenses in the next 2 minutes, they'll mobilize the full force of their armada. Carr gripped the controls. We make this quick? Straight to the heart. Their ships barreled through the outer defenses, dodging waves of automated turrets and missile systems. Carr's weapon systems lit up, blasting apart interceptors as Thorne's ship carved a path through the defense grid. Inside the stronghold, Carr knew the Council's high command was watching, scrambling to deploy the last of their forces. They pushed through to the surface, landing on the Council's central compound, a massive, metallic fortress set against barren plains. The air was charged, filled with the distant roar of defense systems recalibrating for a final assault. Carr and Thorne disembarked, weapons at the ready. This is it, Thorne said, his voice low. You're the galaxy's best chance. Carr didn't respond. He'd already committed himself to this course. Together, they entered the stronghold, moving with precision through hallways patrolled by armed guards. They fought their way forward, each corridor bringing them closer to the Council chamber. As they neared the heart of the fortress, a transmission came through, the Council's leader addressing them directly. Carr, the voice sneered, you're nothing but a wrench in the machine. Destroying our systems, disrupting order. What do you think you're achieving? Carr stopped, activating his comm. Your version of order is nothing but subjugation. You built this empire on fear and control, and it's coming down. Order is necessary, the voice retorted, calm but icy. You remove us, and you replace stability with chaos. Is that what you want? Carr felt the familiar anger rising, but held it in check. What I want is freedom for the worlds you've oppressed. Freedom? The voice laughed. Freedom leads to division, to conflict. Without us, you're looking at a galaxy that will tear itself apart. The Council leader's words echoed in Carr's mind, but he pressed forward. He knew he had to see this through, even if the aftermath was unpredictable. Carr and Thorne reached the Council chamber, a massive hall with high ceilings and dark, polished walls. The Council members, draped in traditional insignia, stood at the far end, their expressions a mix of defiance and contempt. At their head was the Council's leader, his gaze piercing as he regarded Carr. So, this is the infamous Carr, the leader sneered. The great liberator. Carr raised his weapon. Your time is up. The leader smirked, unfazed. You're a fool if you think killing us will solve anything. We have networks, allies across sectors. You destroy us here, but you'll only light the fuse on the galaxy's fragmentation. Carr knew there was truth in his words. He wasn't ignorant of the reality that the Council's downfall would lead to upheaval. But he also knew he couldn't let their tyranny continue. The Council guards lunged forward, and the fight erupted. Carr and Thorn moved with precision, their training and determination overpowering the Council's remaining forces. The chamber filled with the crackle of energy weapons, the Council members falling one by one, until only the leader remained. The leader held up his hands, his eyes steely. "You've won," he said, voice calm, almost resigned. "But you'll see, you've set a fire that will consume the galaxy." Carr aimed his weapon, but paused. "Maybe, but it'll be a galaxy that gets to decide its own fate." With a final shot, he ended the Council's reign. Carr and Thorn emerged from the stronghold, stepping into the harsh light of Turanox. The fortress lay silent behind them, the once imposing symbol of control, now nothing more than a ruin. Carr took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his actions settle on him. "What now?" Thorn asked, his tone uncertain. "We've dismantled the Council, but they weren't wrong about the chaos that's coming." Carr looked out at the sky, considering the path ahead. "We guide them," he said finally, "as best we can. Help rebuild without control, let the worlds find their own way." Thorn nodded slowly, as if he'd expected the answer. Together, they left Turanox, each aware that their work was far from over. They had fought for freedom, and now they would fight to make sure that freedom could endure.